There comes a moment in everyone's financial journey when something subtle but powerful begins to shift. It doesn't happen with fireworks or fanfare. It doesn't show up in your bank app as a sudden spike. It arrives quietly, almost like a change in the air, and unless you're really paying attention, you might never recognize it. This is the point where saving money, the very habit that built your early foundation, starts losing its impact. Not because saving is bad, not because investing suddenly stops working, and certainly not because you've become wealthy enough to ignore discipline. None of that. It changes because the entire engine behind your wealth begins to transform. What once depended almost entirely on your effort slowly shifts into something driven by momentum. And that transformation, though silent, changes everything. But before we dig into why this happens and how to recognize it, let me welcome you. This is Mike Compound, where we break down the financial truths most people never mention, but everyone deserves to understand. If you want clarity, direction, and the confidence to build the life you're aiming for, you're in the right place. Now let's start at the beginning of this shift. The early days, when every dollar you saved felt like a victory. In those first chapters of your financial story, every deposit matters. If you have $1 million, $10,000, or even $75,000 invested, most of the growth you see doesn't come from market returns. It comes from you. Your contribution is the heartbeat of your portfolio. Cheaper lunches, skipped purchases, smarter decisions, all of it adds up. Every choice moves the needle forward, and you can literally see the progress in real time. In those early stages, saving doesn't just feel productive, it feels powerful. You cut a small expense here, you delay a purchase there, and suddenly your account balance shows a real difference. It's motivating. It makes you feel in control. Each dollar you set aside becomes a clear, measurable step towards something bigger, and that momentum pushes you to keep going. You skip a $20 takeout meal, you find a better deal on a subscription, or you trim a recurring cost that never really mattered. Back then, these tiny victories weren't tiny at all. They were meaningful. They were the building blocks of your financial foundation. But there's a catch, one that almost nobody talks about. As time goes on, as your investments grow, those small victories start to shrink in significance, not emotionally, but mathematically. Imagine trying to add drops of water into a river that's already rushing with force. In the beginning, your drops actually change the flow. But once the river becomes powerful enough, your effort still matters. It just doesn't move the river the way it did before. That's exactly what happens to your portfolio. Fast forward 10 or 15 years, and that same $100 or $200 you save each week barely registers. Not because you've gotten worse at managing money, but because your portfolio has quietly started doing the heavy lifting on its own. Without asking for permission, without requiring more hours of work from you, your investments begin to grow relentlessly in the background. The habits that once built your wealth start to lose their ability to meaningfully move the numbers. This is where most people get confused, because no one ever explained this shift to them. As your investments continue to grow, something fascinating starts happening beneath the surface. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the returns on your existing portfolio begin to overshadow the contributions you're adding manually. It doesn't feel dramatic. There's no clear moment where the system announces, from now on, compounding takes the lead. Instead, it unfolds quietly, in the background, until one day you look at your numbers and realize that the growth you're seeing didn't come from you. It came from your money working on its own. Let's break this down with real numbers, the same way the original idea presents it. Imagine you're just getting started and you consistently invest $8,400 per year. In the beginning, that contribution is everything. It's the fuel. It's the source of nearly all your growth. Your investments might only generate a tiny amount in returns, a few $100s, a few thousand at most, so your effort is what builds the foundation. But something changes when you hit around $100,000 invested. At that level, assuming a 10% return, which mirrors the long-term average of the S&P 500, your portfolio earns about $10,000 a year without you lifting a finger. Suddenly, your $8,400 contribution is no longer the main driver. For the first time, the growth from your investments is actually exceeding the amount you're adding manually. This is the first sign that compounding is stepping onto center stage. Then the gap widens. At $500,000 invested, your portfolio generates roughly $50,000 per year at that same 10% return. Your contribution of $8,400 now represents only about 17% of the portfolio's annual growth. The compounding engine has taken over, and it's running faster than you can push. By the time your investments reach $1,000,000, the shift becomes undeniable. Your portfolio now generates around $100,000 per year in growth on its own, more than 10 times the amount you're manually contributing. That same $8,400 you once worked so hard to save now barely nudges the total. Not because the contribution is small, but because the machine you've built has become that powerful. The compounding effect that once crawled forward is now sprinting. What used to rely on your discipline has transformed into momentum. This is the stage where many people misunderstand what's happening. They continue focusing on squeezing every last dollar out of their budget, clipping coupons, chasing tiny discounts, and obsessing over micro-savings, even though these actions barely move the needle anymore. Why? Because that mindset was essential in the beginning. It's how they started. It's how they built their foundation. But mathematically, the rules have changed, and emotionally, they haven't caught up yet. At this level, adding more money to your portfolio has diminishing impact unless the amount you're adding is large enough to match the speed at which your investments are already growing. Your wealth now thrives on automatic growth, not effort. So when people ask, when does saving start to make less sense? The answer is simple. When your contributions are overshadowed by the exponential returns your portfolio is generating every single year. And yet, despite reaching this point, many people continue pushing themselves as if they're still at the very beginning of their journey. They keep saving aggressively, not because it's necessary, but because the habit has become a part of them. That's where everything begins to get interesting, and where another layer of psychology comes into play. To understand this next stage, imagine your wealth journey as pushing a massive boulder up a steep hill. In the beginning, every inch is earned with effort. You budget carefully, you choose cheaper options, you invest consistently, and the boulder responds. It moves because you push it. Progress is slow, but visible. Every small win feels deserved, and every dollar saved feels like a direct contribution to your future. This is the stage where discipline matters more than anything else. But then something remarkable happens. If you keep pushing with consistency, patience, and intention, the boulder eventually reaches the top. And the moment it crests that hill, everything changes. It begins rolling on its own. You're no longer the engine, momentum is. And once that momentum kicks in, it doesn't just keep the boulder moving, it accelerates it. Faster, stronger, unstoppable. That's your portfolio once compounding takes full control. Your money isn't just growing, it's multiplying. Year after year, the growth becomes larger than anything you could realistically contribute manually. But momentum only works if the direction is right. If your money sits idle, in low-yield accounts or overly conservative investments, then the boulder never crests the hill, no matter how much effort you put in. That's why alignment matters. The right investments combined with consistent contributions create the force that makes everything accelerate later. Another way to look at it is through the metaphor of a garden. Early on, every plant needs attention, water, pruning, patience. Each win is small but meaningful, but eventually the trees grow tall, bear fruit, and sustain themselves. You still care for them, but your effort no longer determines the entire outcome. Now here's where the psychology becomes even more interesting. Many people spend decades building disciplined habits, budgeting carefully, reviewing every purchase, avoiding unnecessary expenses, investing diligently. Over time, these behaviors stop being strategies and start becoming part of their identity. Saving becomes instinct. Frugality becomes familiar. The cautious mindset becomes the default setting. Even when the numbers show they've already won the game, their habits keep them playing as if they're still at the starting line. Think of the couple who has lived on 75 alms a year for decades, quietly building a $5,000 portfolio, enough to comfortably support a $200,000 annual lifestyle through a 4% withdrawal rate. Mathematically, they've made it. Their goal is achieved. Their future is secure. And yet, they don't upgrade their lifestyle. They stay in the same modest home. They keep their cars for 10 or 15 years. They continue treating spending as something risky, uncomfortable, or even unnecessary. They maintain the exact same habits that built their wealth long after those habits stop having meaningful impact. This isn't wrong. It's human. When something has worked for so long, it feels unnatural to change. But the reality is clear. Saving and contributing become less impactful once compounding takes the lead. Your effort matters, but it is no longer the primary driver of your growth. And that's the moment when continuing to save aggressively stops making practical sense. In the end, the question shifts from how much more should I save to how can I optimize, manage, and enjoy what I've already built? Because the truth is simple. Once your wealth has momentum, the system you've created becomes the engine, not your effort.